All right, let's dive in. This time we're tackling the future of oil and gas. You guys sent in a ton of sources, articles, research, even some opinions. Clearly you want to know what's next for this industry, and honestly, so do I. It's fascinating seeing this back and forth. Some experts are predicting a super cycle, like a massive boom, but others say oil's days are numbered with renewables taking over. So which future is more likely, and even more important, what does it mean for us?
What's really interesting is that both sides have some really solid points. But I don't think it's about picking a winner. It's more about understanding what's actually going on so you can make smart decisions.
Okay, so let's unpack this whole super cycle thing. You've been digging through the research. Break it down. What is it?
Yeah.
And why are people predicting one now?
So picture oil prices like a roller coaster, up and down, pretty normal, right? A super cycle is like that roller coaster getting stuck going uphill for years. Prices stay high, way above what we've seen historically. There are two big things driving these predictions. Not enough supply and demand that keeps rising. Since about 2014, there hasn't been enough investment in making more oil. Not enough wells, pipelines, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like the world's thirsty for oil, but we haven't been building enough wells to keep up.
Exactly. And then add in the global economy recovering after the pandemic, especially in big markets like China and the US. You've got demand going through the roof, people traveling again, businesses doing well. All that needs oil.
But here's the thing, right? We can't forget about the big push for clean energy. And of course, electric vehicles. That's got to factor in.
You're absolutely right. This super cycle, if it happens, could be oil's last hurrah. Think of it this way. Even if prices spike in the short term, long term, the world's shifting gears, this might be driven by those short-term factors, not a fundamental shift in how we power our world.
So while some are betting on this boom, others are saying, hold up, the party's ending. It really all comes down to how long the demand for oil will actually last.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Some experts think demand already peaked. Back in 2019, at about 100 million barrels a day, they say the pandemic changed things. Less commuting, less travel overall. It changed our habits.
Like a forced reset on how much oil we use.
Yeah, exactly. And even though things have picked up since then, they don't think we'll ever hit those pre-pandemic levels again. Others are a bit more optimistic. They think demand will rebound, but maybe not that high.
It's a fascinating debate. It impacts everyone. If demand drops, that changes everything from gas prices to investments. But there's another piece here, right? What about places like China and India? Living standards are rising. Doesn't that mean they'll use more oil?
You bring up a great point. We can't ignore that. As millions of people join the middle class, they can afford things like cars and plane tickets, which all drives up oil demand, even if the overall economy slows down a bit. Think of it like this. You might decide to drive less, but there are millions who are just getting their licenses.
It's like trying to win a race where the finish line keeps moving further away. So, will electric vehicles be enough to offset that increase in demand?
That's what's so interesting about this moment. We're at a crossroads, and the choices we make in the next few years will have a huge impact for decades.
Okay, so we've got this possible super cycle on one hand and clean energy rising on the other. What does this mean for the oil and gas companies? Are they just sitting around waiting to see what happens?
No, absolutely not. They're feeling the pressure to become more sustainable. Investors are getting nervous about climate change, consumers want action, and governments are making regulations tougher. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions isn't optional anymore. It's about survival at this point.
So it's not just about pumping oil anymore. It's showing they can do it responsibly. In a world that's more and more focused on climate, what are they doing to adapt?
They're trying everything they can. One strategy is electrifying their operations. So they're not burning fossil fuels to, extract more fossil fuels.
Wait, so they're using electricity to get oil? Isn't that a little ironic?
It does seem a bit counterintuitive, right? But it's a step towards lowering their carbon footprint. Then there's this carbon capture tech. It's supposed to trap CO2 emissions from power plants and things like that and store it underground. Imagine a giant vacuum for carbon.
That's some serious tech. And what about those investments in renewables we keep hearing about, like solar and wind? Are oil companies actually becoming energy companies?
A lot of them are trying to make that shift. They're investing in solar and wind farms, testing the waters with hydrogen production, even getting into EV charging infrastructure. They're hedging their bets, realizing that the future might not be all about oil, which is a smart move. When you think about it, they see the writing on the wall. Take Ørsted, for example. They were a Danish oil and gas company, but now they're leading the way in offshore wind energy. They saw where things were headed and completely changed their business.
That's a huge shift. But is it all just for show? Or are they really committed to this change?
That's the big question, right? Some companies are definitely greenwashing, trying to make themselves look good, but others are making real changes. It's like anything else. There are leaders and there are those who fall behind. But the fact that so many oil companies are diversifying tells us something. They know the energy landscape is changing and they're trying to adapt.
It's almost like watching a caterpillar turn into a butterfly, except it's a giant oil rig turning into a wind farm. But this diversification, it's not all smooth sailing, is it? What are some of the challenges they're facing?
Well, for one, oil and gas are still super profitable. It's hard to walk away from something that's making you that much money. Some shareholders see these other investments as risky, like they're getting distracted. Plus, there's the whole issue of what they've already built, these legacy assets. These companies have spent billions on oil rigs, pipelines, refineries. It's not easy to just abandon all that.
It's like trying to switch from a gas guzzler to an electric car overnight. There's a lot of momentum to overcome.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us to another important part of this, the role of natural gas.
Okay, let's talk about natural gas. It's often called a bridge fuel, cleaner than oil and coal. But is it really a solution? Or just delaying the shift away from fossil fuels?
I think it's a bit of both. Imagine you're trying to cross a river, and natural gas is like a bridge to the other side, which is clean energy. It's cleaner than burning coal or oil, emits less CO2, and we have a lot of it.
So it buys us some time, but it's not the end goal.
Exactly. The problem is that this bridge might not be as strong as we think. If renewables take off faster than we expect, natural gas could become a stranded asset. All those pipelines and infrastructure just sitting there unused.
So it's a gamble then. What about those other technologies we hear about, like hydrogen and biofuels? Are those potential game changers?
Definitely. Hydrogen is fascinating because it can be made from different sources, including renewables, and when you burn it, the only byproduct is water. Imagine a world powered by a fuel that makes water.
Now that's what I call clean energy. What about biofuels? Are we talking about filling up our cars with used cooking oil?
That's one way to do it, but it's more advanced than that. Some biofuels are being made from algae. You can grow it in huge amounts, and it turns sunlight into energy.
So we could be driving cars powered by algae. That sounds like science fiction.
It does, right. The challenge with these new technologies, though, is they're not quite ready for prime time. They need more research and development, more investment to make them work on a large scale.
It's like they're still in the prototype phase, but the potential is huge. We've talked a lot about demand and technology, but there's another thing we can't ignore. Oil is a finite resource. It won't last forever.
You're right. We have to talk about depletion. There's this concept called cumulative discoveries. It helps us understand how much oil we've already found and how much might be left.
Okay, break that down for me. What is cumulative discoveries?
Imagine a giant odometer for oil, tracking how much we've used and how much is left. That's basically what it is. And the data shows we're using known reserves faster than we're finding new ones.
So like we're running down the battery on our planet's oil supply.
In a way, yeah. And that means global production will eventually decline. Some experts think this could start before 2030.
That's a lot sooner than I thought. What does that mean for the average person? Someone just trying to fill up their tank.
Well, think about it like this. As oil production drops, it'll get more expensive and maybe even hard to find. We've seen gas prices spike when supply gets disrupted. Now imagine that happening more often and getting worse.
Yikes, that's not a good picture like those gas lines we saw back in the 70s. Are we headed for an energy crisis?
Not necessarily. The good news is we have time to prepare and adapt, but we need to start now. The longer we wait, the harder and more expensive this transition will be.
So it's like knowing a hurricane is coming and we can get ready, but instead we're just sitting around watching TV.
That's a pretty good analogy. We have the knowledge and the tools to get through this, but we have to use them.
Okay, so let's talk solutions. What needs to happen to make this energy transition smoother?
We need a multi-pronged approach, and it starts with depending less on oil. That means more fuel-efficient vehicles, switching to electric cars, using public transport, and just driving less overall.
So it's about changing our habits just as much as changing the technology.
Absolutely. Every mile you don't drive, every flight you skip, that's less demand for oil, and the more people do that, the smoother this transition will be. But it's not just about individuals. Governments and businesses need to step up too.
What role can they play?
Governments can create policies that encourage energy efficiency and renewable energy. Think tax breaks for electric cars, investing in public transport, and regulations that phase out fossil fuels. Businesses can invest in cleaner tech, reduce their own energy use, and support sustainability in their supply chains.
It sounds like a massive task, but also a chance to build a world that's more sustainable and resilient.
Exactly. And we've already seen it happening. Countries like Denmark and Costa Rica are leading the way with renewables, showing it's possible to power a modern economy without relying so much on fossil fuels.
That's inspiring. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's hope for the future.
Absolutely. The future isn't set. It's something we create with our choices and our actions. And the more we know, the better decisions we can make.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's clear that what happens with oil and gas is tied to the future of our planet and our way of life.
That's a key point. We can't think about energy on its own. It's connected to everything. And the choices we make today will have a ripple effect for generations.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listener to remember?
That the future isn't fixed. We have the power to change it. And the more we understand what's happening, the better we can use that power.
Like a powerful message to end on. We'll be back in a bit to explore some final thoughts and leave you with some key takeaways from this deep dive into the future of oil and gas. Welcome back to our deep dive into the future of oil and gas. We've covered a lot of ground, from those super cycles to sustainability, and it's obvious this is a big deal for all of us. So as we wrap up, what are the main things you want listeners to take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. The future isn't set in stone. We have a choice, we have options. It's easy to get caught up in the news, to think that this huge oil and gas industry is just going to keep going, like always. But the truth is, we're at a turning point.
It's like we're all on this big tanker, and we can actually decide which way it goes.
Exactly. The decisions we make, whether it's our own choices or what we do as a society, those decisions will shape what the future looks like. Will we run out of resources fighting over what's left? Or will it be a future where we have enough, with clean energy driving innovation? We have the knowledge, the tech, the resources to make a better future, but we have to act now.
So it's not about waiting for someone else to fix it. It's on each of us to do our part. What are some things people can do in their own lives to be part of the solution?
There's a lot you can do, and it doesn't have to be huge changes. Start by just noticing how much energy you use, how much do you drive, how often do you fly, could you carpool, take the bus, walk, or bike more? Even small things can make a difference.
It's like those energy saving tips we see might not seem like much on their own, but together they add up.
Yeah, exactly. Then there are the bigger decisions, like what kind of car you buy next. Could you get an electric one? If not, at least pick a fuel-efficient model. Think about energy use at home, too. Are you using energy-saving light bulbs? Could you improve insulation to save on heating and cooling?
These are all things that help the planet A&D save you money, win-win.
Exactly. And don't forget you have a voice. Talk to your friends and family about this stuff. Let your elected officials know you support clean energy policies, a sustainable future.
It's about using our collective voice to push for change.
Yes, and remember, this transition won't happen overnight. There will be bumps along the way. But I'm optimistic. I think we're smart enough and determined enough to build a better future.
This deep dive has given me hope and a lot to think about. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
That's a powerful thought to leave us with. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this episode got you thinking and inspired you to learn more, stay informed, and take action to shape the future of energy.